name is Becky Hoffman, and I've been attending the Crossing Church for about 4 years now. And I also work full-time for World Orphans as the Director of Rescue Teams. So my role on this trip was to be a representative of the Crossing and to find out more information about the work being done in Guatemala.
My name is Kim Kernan, and I not only had the privilege of going on this trip as a representative of the Crossing Church, but I also got to be the team photographer.
I'm Billy Hill. I've been coming to the Crossing Church for about 18 years now. I would say that my role on the trip was more like being, I guess, a long-term member, as just getting a feel for what it's like in Guatemala. What's the culture going through? What are they experiencing? What are some of the challenges they're facing?
This trip was a little bit different than most trips that World Orphans does. It was specifically a World Orphans Vision trip. So it was for representatives from churches in the U.S. to go and discover more about what World Orphans is doing in Guatemala.
In my mind, World Orphans does a fantastic job of bringing everybody together. That was the biggest reason I went. I was all about, forming these lasting relationships.
I have never gone on a trip outside of the country before, ever. So my expectations were wide open. But as I got closer to the trip, I started to realize that I think God was trying to lead me to take a step of faith in my own personal life, and that through this experience of engaging in a different culture that's kind of outside my comfort zone, well, is outside my comfort zone, that He would open my eyes to a different way He's working in the world.
I was definitely changed by the trip in Guatemala. I think that it's difficult to do something like that and not come back with something positive that you've gained from your experience.
Guatemala is a country with a lot of needs. It's a beautiful country, it has great landscape, it has great culture, but they were ravaged by a 36-year civil war. So there are a lot of issues. There's poverty and crime and drugs and gangs and just lots of things that are crippling the people from making progress. So World Orphans likes to work with the lowest of the low so that they can preserve families and care for orphans and vulnerable children. One thing that really stood out was when we visited the city dump. It's this huge ravine just full of garbage, and over 10,000 people make their livelihood, if you even can call it that, by scavenging for recyclables in there. And it was just a level of poverty that I'd never seen before.
Looking at that from a distance and just hearing the stories about how they're just trying to do what they can to survive, that hit me hard.
I think that the biggest part of the trip to Guatemala for me came in the last day when we were actually all going out to lunch, and the man named Yenner shared his story. He was saying how he worked for Young Life in Nicaragua, but he kind of left a very prosperous ministry to come to Guatemala because they were in the greatest need. And I couldn't help but, sit there and just think, wow, we could make such a difference.
I was really impacted by seeing the people's perseverance. They have nothing. They have no resources. They have a terrible economy. They just have all these things against them, and yet they're persevering. The church is just so active there despite all these obstacles. One example is that we saw this church, this inner city church of 50 people, and they do a VBS every Saturday for 70 children, just so those kids have a safe place to go on Saturday. And what was even cooler is that the local pastors send their teenage children there to the school to volunteer to teach Bible lessons. So these teenage kids who could be in gangs or getting into trouble on the streets are going and teaching Bible lessons to pour into the next generation. So it was just such a cool place to see how the church is getting involved and how World Orphans is helping these families.
When you're down there, you got that sense of what these people were craving. And they weren't craving us to come down and fix problems. We're not going to fix it in a week. What they craved the most was relationship, was community with the American church, and to know that we're in the same body of Christ.
When I got there, I was just so taken by the sense of community.
Just even spending a day with a church body we visited on Sunday, fellowshipping with them, having pizza with them, and playing soccer with them. The whole church was there, and we didn't do anything for these people. We just showed up to their church. So to see that kind of sense of community and relationship, that kind of taught me, I don't think we're doing something right up here. I think we could do something better about that.
I think that despite everything that's going on, there's so many positive things happening. The fact that everybody can unite and just come together as one. And I think that the global church is doing incredible things in Guatemala, and it would really be a shame if we weren't a part of it.
I personally am so excited that 2016 is going to be the year honor the child at the Crossing Church. And I love that we're going to be doing things right in our community, in Patterson, and hopefully around the world in Guatemala.
My hope is that our church personally will people would want to be engaged with that and be able to use the gifts that God's given them to serve in any way they can the people down there.
When we get further involved in this relationship with Guatemala, there's going to be an opportunity for everyone, from children to youth to adults. Everyone with any skill set, there's a way for you to get involved. So I think what we can start by doing is just praying and asking God where He might lead us, whether we go on a trip and we teach them some of our skills, or whether we stay here and give financially, or whether we help in some other way. There's going to be an opportunity for everyone. So I just think if we can all start praying for Guatemala, praying for the orphans and abandoned children, and praying to ask how God might use us, that's what we can do for now.